Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode.
Hi everyone. Before we begin this episode, we just wanted to let you know that we touch on some sensitive subjects in this episode, namely death and mortality. And if this is a subject that might be hard for you right now, this might not be the best time to listen to this episode. So I just want to give you a heads up at the beginning so you can choose another episode if you feel like that's what you need to take care of yourself.
Anywho-ha.
May I just say that I really like these morning recordings.
You do? Oh.
Yeah, I'm sad when I get back to the UK and it's going to be my stupid Thursday afternoon.
Too bad we can't switch because there's a part of me, I do love mornings. That's my favorite time of day. But I kind of like the idea of recording in the afternoon too. But alas, can't do that.
Here we are.
Doesn't work. Just doesn't work.
Well,
if I come and live in London and you come and live in New York.
Yeah, could do that. So you come to London, but you need to bring your family, and then we'll do a house swap. But you need to take your whole family because I'm not taking on that.
I think that my family would be on board, except for my kids.
So Mike would be on board.
Mike would be on board.
The only one.
Yeah.
What are we talking about today, Steph?
A question came in on the YouTube page. What about when, your eating disorder behaviors develop for a reason? They're a coping tool. So how do we cope if we're taking the tool away? Great question. It came in and I was like typing out a response and I was like, wait a minute, there's so much to this. This needs to be an episode. I don't know that it will be relevant to everyone because I think that sometimes we're ready for this. Sometimes we've outgrown that coping tool and it's almost like it's just there because it's always been there. I think that was my case. That's why I'm speaking to it. And there were things in place for me to feel ready to let it go. But for many people, maybe readiness is a big part of this conversation, because if there might not be a readiness, or if we don't have enough tools outside of it, it's almost going to feel really traumatic to let, whether it's restriction or binging or both, to let those things go is to really kind of strip yourself down and feel extremely exposed and vulnerable and without, what do I do with all that rises that this was covering up?
So a question I often ask in my workshops is, what is the payoff to your binge eating? But let's just say disordered eating behaviors, doesn't have to be binging. If I asked you that question, what was the payoff to your disordered eating? How would you answer that question?
Different responses for different strategies. So when I think about binging was escape and relief. It was an out, and I needed that out.
What were you escaping from?
Overwhelm.
Okay.
Overwhelm. Fear. Gosh, it narrowed everything down. I think it was overwhelm because I couldn't even think straight in times when I would want to binge. It was just like, and then I would just go right into the binge, and it was like this cocoon. It was this nice little cocoon. And I still sometimes even feel that need. You know what I mean? Like there's times where I'm like, oh gosh, I just want to narrow everything down to food. Not that I feel the need for food, but I feel the need for narrowing. Like I feel the need for condensing all of this emotion that feels like I'm just like the cards have been dropped all over the floor to like, just need one thing to focus on right now. That sort of gives me, and food is so good at that because it's also it's very delicious. So there's this bonus. It's not only is it an escape, but it's like it's like really good. There's so many built-in factors that make it such a good resource. But for restriction, it was control. And it was a place to really put my anger and resentment. Oh gosh, I feel it still. Sometimes it's just like, well, damn it, I'm going to restrict. Like that is how I can feel better. It absolutely quenches a thirst for having influence on my life, and feeling like I'm doing something about something. It combats helplessness and hopelessness. So those are two different things, two different purposes, but equally strong.
So if your restricting and binging is to deal with fear, anger, overwhelm, what happens to that experience when those behaviors are removed? This is where the question's coming from, right? If I don't have the food to go to or the food to not go to in that way, I have to experience all those things that you've just said, those moments where I feel like I can't even think straight.
I'll tell you the truth. The hardest one for me to have given up, that is restriction. That one's bigger. I find that one still harder to deal with. Binging, I have found, so I think that what I had done over time is put enough things in place inadvertently to be able to handle those feelings and that anxiety and overwhelm without needing the food. Like I could deal with that because I had developed, like, my own husband, I think, was a part of that because he was a support system in this very unconditional way that I had not had access to when I developed the eating disorder. So in my eating disorder development, I was very alone. And so having feelings wasn't safe for me because they were met with criticism and also irritation. And even in college, like when I was outside of my parents' home, there was this sense of you can't have these feelings. You're in college, you're supposed to be having fun. People don't do this. So to me, it was a very isolated experience, and through my 20s as well. But after I got married, there was something of Mike's ability to hold that for me and to not judge it and to really give room for that. And I think that over time created a safety, right? So there was this feeling of, if I have these large emotions, if I'm absolutely falling apart at the seams, there is someone that will hold that. And that felt safe enough.
This is really interesting to me because you're saying like the hardest part for you to give up was the restriction. And when you said that, I was thinking, that wasn't it for me. That wasn't the hardest part at all. The hardest part to give up was the binging. And whilst the restriction was there in a way, as in I always thought that I should be, I don't think I really got the emotional payoff to restriction that you speak of and other people speak of. That there had been the odd occasion where I might feel that, like a whisper, that sense of feeling powerful and good about managing to do that. But the only payoff to me was weight loss in terms of trying to restrict. I didn't see it as the control part of restriction wasn't as appealing to me as the freedom of binging. Actually, the giving up of the binging in some way meant not curbing my freedom because I have to, but because I'm very sensitive to that happening. But it kind of is, but without doing that.
What do you mean?
I put these slight conditional things on with the permission that I give myself, which I've spoken about before, where I would say things like, I can eat whatever I want, but there was a condition that I had to really notice and taste and enjoy it. Because otherwise, for me, conditioned to eat whatever I wanted could become conditioned to numb. And that wouldn't just disappear by just allowing myself to numb as much as I wanted. So there was a giving up of something in that because I had to allow certain feelings in. And I relate to the idea of escape. When you talk about the binging as feeling rebellious and like escape, yes, like I feel that is very much the same page for me. And I think for a lot of people, when I talk to about the binging, the restriction is, I think because there's a slight hopelessness in me that knows I'm not in control in this world. So why even bother trying?
Yeah.
Maybe it's just like, it looks really like, oh, so accepting, but it's kind of this, well, then maybe I don't want to be here for a bit, so I'm going to go and binge because the control didn't feel possible. And I think what I saw in people when I was in the disordered eating who were able to restrict is, oh, they're the ones who can take control. And I felt shame about the fact that I couldn't.
Sure. I felt that too in college. Restriction was so much of, it was in and out of a force, but see, the thing is, it turns into a hopelessness because you stop being able, for me, some people don't, they just restrict, but it was this whole thing about like, I'm going to take over, I'm going to show the world I have control. I'm going to take it for mine, and then it's great. You're running this adrenaline for a little bit. And then you're like, oh my God, I'm getting really hungry. Oh no, you have to white knuckle this. And that's so hopeless. That's where the rebel response, that's where I'd be like, fine, watch this. And then that wasn't escape. That I think I had multiple reasons for binging, but one of them was like, Oh, I can't control. Okay, watch me go completely out of control. There was a lot of sass in that. If I can't control, watch me destruct. That's what I'm going to do. Now watch how bad this can get. But still this theme of control in this way. Of I'm going to be one extreme or the other. You're not going to catch me in the middle. You're not going to catch me just being okay with the fact that I don't have control. Like I'm going to either take it all or I'm going to throw it back in your face, world. As if that's what I was doing. That's really what it felt like. I mean, it did feel like I was sticking it to the man, but no, the man never cared.
Mm-hmm. So then you mentioned overwhelm. How do you deal with overwhelm now?
So this is why I'm in somatic, the somatic place. That's how I deal with it now. But I'm aware that that wasn't in place when I recovered. Do you know what? I talked about this on an episode a bit back, but COVID happened and it reduced so much for me because my world got smaller. And I think that's what binges used to do, right? Like it used to just make my world so much smaller. And so there was this like saving grace in that where it was like, okay, I only have to think about what's going on in my own home. I don't have to worry about socializing. I don't have to worry about showing up in front of people. I don't even have to get dressed. Like, it took away so much. It also added so much, I will say, because I was also homeschooling my children at the same time I was trying to, how did I deal with that? You know what? The overwhelm of being in my home was huge, and I would go in my closet. So this is how closet coaching developed, because I would go into my closet, which was essentially a metaphor for that cocoon. But I think in the absence of having the world outside to deal with, I don't know. Of course, I was recovering outside of COVID in the beginning. I mean, there was that, but I think that I hid in the black and white recovery idea. It was like, I'm recovering and that's my cocoon. You know what I mean? Like, this is this insular space that I'm going to take for myself for a year, and I'm not required to show up in any other way. So it was this imposition of a cocoon of my own making mentally. And I needed that. And without that, I think about that sometimes with people who are just recovering within their life. And I think it's harder. I think I really needed it to be this mission that I could say, I'm recovering. I can't go. Like I can't go to this party. I can't go to this thing. I can't even work right now because I'm recovering. I needed it to be like that. I needed the cocoon to come out of it. It's like a little butterfly.
So now, if you were in a moment where you felt like that overwhelm in the moment, and you talk about your somatic work, what would that look like? Dealing with that as a somatic, just in the moment, you want to bring yourself down from overwhelm?
Yeah.
Walk us through
every
it,
day.
Steph. You make me do this. Walk us through it.
How?
Yes. How do you do it every day?
Okay, so here's how it goes. I usually am in my home when I have this overwhelm, and the kids are around, and there's not space for me. I'm taking care of others, and this is always a trigger for me. So I'm responsible for a lot of things, and there's sensory overload, and it's loud, and there's noise, and there's things I have to do. And I actually have more of a recognition in that moment that that's happening. So I am able to see that happen instead of be like, oh shoot, that's what was happening. So it used to be so retroactive awareness. Now it's in the moment. And that's come from paying attention to what my body's doing. So I will notice things like my heart rate is faster. My breath is super shallow. But mostly it feels like I get this tunnel vision, and I notice myself being completely unaware of my periphery. It's like all of a sudden I have this instinct to just, I don't know, it's almost like a tunnel like that comes around me, and I sort of check out. And I can feel myself checking out. And when that happens, I name it, and I'm like, "Oh, you're overwhelmed right now. Like your anxiety's too high. You need to tend to that." And so I go. I go to my room. I typically go to my bed. And if I can't do that, then I sort of just bring my awareness back to my body, which is so annoying for me to say because this used to piss me off when people would say this, and I'd be like, ugh, one of these body talkers. Like, I don't know. I'm not interested in that. Like, I really, really wasn't. But honestly, that is kind of what it is. And I recognize all that's happening in there, and I'm like, oh, all right. Like, I don't need to escape it. I can just notice it. I think all of this is coming out to you in words right now. This doesn't happen in words in reality. It just is this sensation of there's this instinct to want to get away from this. Like, I don't want this. I don't like this. I shouldn't have to deal with this. And I think it's more this being like, oh no, it's okay that's there. Just ride that out. And that comes from in the somatic workshops that we do in the trainings. There's an invitation to work with clients around this, which then extends to working with yourself around this, about like, oh, that's a protective mechanism. Like, that's your body absolutely trying to do something for you. Let's go see what it wants to do. Let's not run away from that. And that invitation is sort of akin to self-compassion, where it's kind of like, oh, all right. Yeah, we need to get into this tunnel vision. Like, I need to not breathe very much. I'm getting some energy in my body. That's all there on purpose. Like, what do I want to do with that? And just opening up that sense of this isn't a bad thing. This is okay. It allows me to be with it longer so that I can decide, do I need to sing, which is sometimes what I'll do. I'll like sing at the top of my lungs. My children hate it. And they take away the one, I'm always like, you take away my joy. I don't say that, but I'm like, that is my tool, and you take it away.
Oh, I thought you meant like I thought
What?
you were saying that to your kids about your life. They take away your joy.
No.
There's joy-sapping creatures in
But
your
it's like
life.
all of a sudden I'm like, here, I just want to sing it out, folks. And they're like, stop singing. And I'm like, that's the only out. It's like my one out. Or I will need to go be by myself, and I'll take that opportunity, or I'll be like, I need to go, it depends what it is that I want to do with it. And sometimes there's nothing I can do with it, and I sort of just pout, to be honest. I get really sorry for myself, and I'm like, meh, and I get grouchy. And I'll start being like, it's time to do your homework. And I'll notice myself doing that too. Like I'm working on it, but it's, one of the ways that I translate some of that energy now, instead of to binge on it, is to like clean up the room. Like, I start being a nag basically.
Yeah,
and I can feel that.
Well, what's the point in having kids if you can't project onto them? Isn't that the whole point? You project
right,
all your
so that they can then
them.
project onto their children,
Exactly.
and the generational cycles continue. Yes, this is the point. Do you know what? I mean, I told my daughter the other day, I said, I know that I'm being kind of ridiculous right now. Like, I know that I'm putting a lot on you right now. I was like, I'm feeling like really frustrated, and I need to put it somewhere, and I'm sorry I'm putting it on you. I said, I hope when you have kids, you can actually cut this cycle a little earlier. It's like, I can't get and I really have just recently admitted to myself that I can name it and offer awareness to my children, but I can't necessarily at this moment in time, and probably by the time they leave the house, I don't know that I'm going to be able to actually change it. And I created a post on generational cycles because of this, because I feel really guilty that I'm not breaking that generational cycle, that I'm not able to be like, oh, don't nag your children. It's not on them. That's wonderful. I have that awareness, and yet I can't stop. And I'm going to be okay with that, because my parents never even got that far with me. They never said, sorry, this isn't about you. It's about me. At least I'm saying that. And hopefully, and I made sure to tell Julie and Alex, I said, if you can't fix it either, that's okay too. But I just want you to know where this is coming from. It's really not about you. I'm sorry. Like, but clean your room. But like, get it done.
But you're making mommy very unhappy right now.
No, they know that it's like not. And I know there'll be listeners who are like, you're still parentifying your children. Maybe. I'm sorry. Like, I do my best. And that's what I do with my energy. That's where it's gone. I haven't perfected it, but I think I've gotten further with it. And it's still something I carry that I haven't fully been able to properly probably translate into a very productive place, but it isn't coming back on me as shame or binging. And it's also not going to my children as shame, because I'm naming it and saying it's not about you. I just really need the room clean. And if they don't do it, I also have the awareness to be like, okay, fine. Like, I'm not going to push it. It's just that I need to say it. Like, there's something in the saying it and acting like I'm controlling the world that makes me feel better for the minute. Is this something I want to air? I'm second guessing what I'm saying here.
I think it's helpful too, because I think a lot of people as well, like, even just naming the value of recognizing it and acknowledging it to your kids. Because that's a really tough thing to do. It's a humbling thing to do as an adult, as the parent, to say to your kids.
Oh, really? I find it very easy. I just feel guilty.
I think a lot of people wouldn't. I think there'll be people listening to this who will be like, wow, Stef does that. Honestly, that would be mind blowing to them.
Oh, see, I feel a little bad about it, because I feel like it's a way I'm offloading my guilt instead of changing it. Like, instead of telling my children what I'm doing, maybe I could just change it. It's like, it's not their responsibility to hold that. So I have that whole thing.
You're a human being. You're an overwhelmed mother in that moment. Like that's the identity in that moment. But to name it as the truth, what that does is it removes the confusion and the internalization for the kid.
For them. That's my
Yeah.
goal.
Yeah.
And that's
Which is
what I do.
yeah.
Yes. But it does need to go somewhere. And I think that that's part of what we're talking about here is that it will need to go somewhere else, right? So if you're not using a binge or restrict behavior or disordered behavior anymore, you're still going to have all of this energy coming up, and you're just going to we need to find a different place for it. And that, I think, speaks to this question we received, which is, how do I deal with that? You know what I mean? Like, what am I supposed to do instead? Because all of this stuff is going to come up and I don't have another place to put it. I guess it might be helpful for us to talk about, like, what are other ways that, you know, not to deny that these feelings will exist anymore, but that where else might they go? How do we cope if we're not shoving them all back down with food or restriction?
Well, there's another piece that I want to acknowledge, because the person who wrote the comment, they mentioned depression. And they said that without the eating disorder voice shouting louder than the depression, then the depression is going to come up. And so you're talking about like all this energy, like this anxious energy here, where does it go? And that's not my experience.
Yeah.
Some people are going to be more in that camp with me, us
Yes.
depressives, as opposed to the anxious ones. So for me, when I feel out of control, and I wouldn't even recognize it as that in the moment, it would just be like things are not how I want them to be, and I don't believe that I can change them. There's a shutdown that happens.
Yeah.
And actually food was almost a waking up. And there would be times where I could feel low and the energy wasn't there, and I would have the food and then I would have some energy there and have the binge. I mean, not just because obviously food is energy. So there are times when, you know, food is going to give you that energy and that lift. And I think what helped me with the feeling, the low feelings, the despair, the hopelessness that I'm more vulnerable to is, for me, I think a lot of the time I'm saying depression with a small d, because I don't think that I have clinical depression, but I think I go low when things are difficult. I don't go anxious and have a lot of energy. So when I go to those places, for me, at the micro level, even when my eating was really problematic, at the micro level, my life was okay. My work was good. I liked my job. I had good friendships and relationships, security, and all those things. So like life was okay at the micro level. My despair and the hopelessness was like at the existential level, when I looked at everything and the very essence of who I was, you know, these bigger kind of themes that would come in, and I would feel like I wasn't enough in so many areas. I wasn't doing enough. I wasn't being enough. And yet over here, I'm too much. And I think my life position was just, I can't win. How do I win this life thing? I can't win. So everything's terrible. Actually zooming in into the micro is really helpful for me. When I bring myself into the moment, it's why I talk a lot about the idea of presence. When I'm in the here and now and I'm like, okay, what's now? That's why the Ralick method that I talked about in my book was so helpful, because it brings me into the here and now. What is going on here now for me in this moment? And can I be okay with that? It's like releasing the resistance to that things are not the way they're supposed to be, but I'm making it macro. And when I bring it micro, it's okay.
This is fascinating to me, because I had a conversation with someone yesterday about depression and about my experience with it. And I literally use the words macro and micro the opposite way. So when I was depressed, I felt like I was so micro. I felt like I was so aware of me and every single nuance of feeling like that I would have. All of that existential feeling felt like this big, like black hole of me, like so micro. There's something about the peripheral vision of that. I don't know how to describe this. It's really hard, but it's sort of seeing yourself in your surroundings, but more the immediate ones. It's not too far out, but it's not too close in. It's this sense of you with the world in your moment. But you can't go too close into that, but you also can't go too far out. There's a sweet spot of it. And maybe yours, like you were so far out and you came in this much, and I was so far in and I came, and I think we're actually meeting in the same place. It's just so different how we might think about, or how we might think, that the depression feels like. You might feel like it's so super close and zoomed in, or you might feel like it's so huge and wide and open. And maybe it's like there's something in this middle.
Well, I might think of it as depression has a narrative. right? So what's
Yeah.
the narrative of your depression? If the narrative of your depression is at the, my life's terrible, my job's terrible, this is terrible, like all these sort of immediate things in your life, that's where the depression hooks onto. Then going bigger may be beneficial, right? Looking at bigger picture, bigger, being a human being on the planet. But if your depression has the bigger existential narrative, then coming in a bit closer is going to, so I think it's like listening to what is it that these low feelings, the despair and the hopelessness, what's the story behind it? And then trying to occupy a different space in that story, stepping out of the story, which could be stepping back, it could be stepping in. If I feel stressed and overwhelmed, maybe overwhelmed is not quite the right word I want to use here, but if I feel stressed or distressed by something in my world, like, the little things that's probably not even about the little things you get worked up about, those are the times when I need to go bigger.
If you want connection and support around any of the topics we talk about on the podcast, we would love for you to join our membership community.
Members have access to monthly online support groups, a private Facebook group, live episode recordings, and member-only Q&As.
If you would like to join us, please head to lifeafterdietspodcast.com/community.
Now let's get back to the episode.
There's a really nice analogy, and it's about the Ganges River in India and parts of the river where the water is really fast flowing and people need to go down to the water to bathe. The currents are really strong. So they have these ropes that are across the river, that are tied across the river. So you go into the river and you hold on to the ropes so that you don't get swept away by the currents. And the analogy often used is often likened to something like habit or routine, is that like it's something to hold on to in the chaos. And I think it's why the time that I spend on the yoga mat in the morning and the evening is so precious to me, because no matter how fast the currents are, it's almost invariable, unless I can't for some reason, that I'm going to get on that mat. It's this consistency. It's my rope, I think, in the fast flowing current. It's a moment where it's like, okay, I know what these next 20 minutes are going to be, no matter what else is going on.
Yeah.
So routine, I think, would be another part of it. But
Routine. We're on the same page. I wrote this yesterday. Routines and rituals. However, what if you don't show up to the mat? What if you keep not doing that? Then we have to talk about the self-sabotage episode. You have to go to a different episode.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think. I think the times when that's happened has normally been because there's some external shift in my routine. It's not, I'm trying to think if it's really happened at home.
But what about the self-trust element? What if you internally can't get there? You just keep blowing by it? Because that would have been me. I mean, if I had made a decision to get on the mat and then I just wouldn't, and then I would hate myself for that.
Well, it built up over years. I've said this started off as a 5-minute stretch in the evening. And it just, and I made it really, I really lowered the bar. It was just, I had to step on the mat. So if I wasn't well or something like that, I just had to like go in child's pose for like a minute. But normally if I'm going to do that, I'm going to throw in a few stretches as well. And then I started doing YouTube videos on yoga and building up from there. That kind of trust is built up over time. You might hear me talking about this going like, oh, great, I'm going to do yoga morning and night. Sarah does it. It works for her. So she's saying that's what everybody should be doing. It's like, well, no, your habit could be something completely different. But when we live in a world where we're so out of control, there's a predictability in habits. And yoga has this great, it's in the wellness culture as well. And it's a really good one to have, right? That's one of the best habits to have. But it's like trying to get away from that moral judgment, even having breakfast at the same time each morning and a cup of coffee. And maybe you always listen to our podcast every morning and that becomes your habit. Anything can be a habit. There's just this predictability element that it feels supportive. It's something to hold on to.
Yes.
And there's not a
anchor.
It's not working against you.
Right.
Don't worry about taking up a yoga practice or thinking that you should.
Sometimes I would rebel against the very idea of doing that though. And I think that we can't have this conversation without talking about like safety, right? So there has got to be a certain amount of safety involved in being able to say, I want to create something else besides my eating disorder. Because if I think about the times where I knew what to do, but wasn't doing any of it, I don't think at that time in my life, I was safe enough to be willing to try anything else except the eating disorder. Because the eating disorder was the only thing I knew worked. You know what I mean? Like I had evidence of it. I was in it. There was no trial and error versus I don't know if a yoga mat or all the other things that I would try to do, I don't know if that's going to be enough. And so I don't trust it. And so it's not safe for me to do that. It also never occurred to me at the time, because I was so black and white, so all or nothing, to use both, which is one of the biggest things that I'll have people, it's like, we're going to add things in, but we're not taking away food. That's not the expectation, because to swap them felt like, no, like, I'm not going to take away my safety blanket, trusting you're going to give me another one. Like, what about the interim? And also, what if you don't give me the other one? Because I don't really trust things. So it's like, you're going to hold on to your safety blanket, and I'm going to hand you this other one. You don't have to let go until you've got both in your hand. And that, to me, like, there's this very, very foundational concept of safety that's got to exist before we can feel ready enough to let go of eating disorder behaviors, because we've got to feel safe that we're going to be able to cope with what comes up. And certain things probably have to be in place. And what those things are, I think, can be unconditional support or love or acceptance, right? From another human being. I think you're going to find that, I don't know, or from yourself, I was going to say, but I don't know that I would have found that first. But maybe rituals, routines, habits, and also to some extent, like that, knowing what to do with your physical body, like the physical sensations that do come up. For example, in that overwhelm description, like, that's a body experience, right? There's so much going on in my body at that time, as well as despair, detachment, loss. I've had clients describe that, like, there's just an empty hole in your chest, like, that's really uncomfortable. And so there's got to be some safety sense in the body, which means we have to be able to connect to our body at first, because we're so detached from our body. So I think that this is a whole, this takes time, years. And that's probably why it took me years to recover. It took you years to recover. There's so much that to be developed first in the body, being comfortable to get into the body, and then to be able to find safety, sensations of safety within the body. People, self-talk, rituals, and habits that fall apart and come back together, and fall apart and come back over time, to be able to say, there's enough foundation here for me to work with, to be able to let some of these things go. But I don't think that's a decision you make overnight, nor can you ever implement overnight. I think that there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes first to get to the place where we have enough safety to say, I can cope without this eating disorder. It's going to be hard, but I feel safe enough to do that. Yeah.
I want to comment on overwhelm, because you talk about overwhelm, there's a lot going on in your body. For me, overwhelm is very much experienced in my head. For me, overwhelm is a head emotion.
It's there too.
Stress is a body emotion, but all the energy is up in my head. The energy is not.
That's still part of your body.
I know, but I guess when you're talking about, like, the somatic approach to overwhelm, that's going to be beneficial in so many ways for so many people. What I need in that moment is actually the cognitive, because that's how I calm down the overwhelm. It's like, okay, let me ground myself in the here and now. Let me go through what's actually going on for me now. I need to get my thinking on board and go, okay, I need to look at it from a place of perspective. Like, I'm not always, I have to cognitively deal with all my emotions. No, I really see the benefit of the embodiment thing, but overwhelm is really a mental one for me. That's how
really?
It's a one thing at a time thing.
Oh, but see, I get that, but I actually, so before I could ever connect to my body from the neck down, overwhelm to me was all up here. But the person I was working with was like, well, okay, then that's part of your body, then work with it up there. For me to slow my thoughts down, I have to slow that ping pong ball down. It's a very physical experience. I don't know that I could just tell my brain to just stop that.
I think I find giving my brain a question is the best way to make it focus. And it will. So it would be like, okay, the overwhelm's gone. It's like, okay, wait, what am I believing right now? Asking that question. I'm asking my brain, and my brain will organize itself if I have the wherewithal to stop and ask, when it gets to the point that I have the wherewithal to go, like, what's actually going on here? And my brain will slow down with a question.
Yeah, I'm doing it now.
Yeah.
I'm doing it now. And it's focusing. I think it's just how you relate to this, because the question does slow me down, but I'm actually seeing it as I'm picturing the slowdown, and the picturing is somatic, right? So there's some kind of, they work so well together. I think it's like, which one do you lean more towards, and then invite the other one in.
In bed last night, I had quite a somatic experience as I was going to sleep. This probably happens to me because I always, talk about not really experiencing much on the anxiety scale. This probably happens about 4 times a year, maybe not even that often. But occasionally I'll get into bed and for whatever reason, my body won't settle. It's agitated. And sometimes like my heart it'll just race like an anxiety.
Mm.
And a couple of occasions in my life where this has happened, where I feel my heart racing, right? And it happened to me last night, and I was like, oh gosh, and I really felt like all the buzzing in my body as well with it. And I was like, okay. So I was like, my brain was very calm with it. My mind didn't panic about it. And I went to my heartbeat and I was like, okay, just breathe and try to slow it down. And when I tried to do that, it sped up. And then my brain was like, oh, hang on a second. All right, what do we do now? Okay, well, just stay with it.
Yeah.
Because I knew that in the very resistance, I think
Yes.
often if I feel that I can breathe and concentrate on slowing my heart down and it will obey. But for whatever reason, my body did not obey on this occasion.
It will obey.
And my mind was like, it had the wherewithal to go like, just don't resist them. Just stay there, keep your focus on your heart, and just have this experience of your heart racing.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did that and I stopped trying to slow it down, then it started to slow down.
Yeah.
So I think my mind maybe just works a bit slower than other people's. People talk about like that very, you talk about that ping pong thing going off in your brain. Like I don't have a personal experience of that. I don't relate to that in terms of how my brain feels.
Oh, you're lucky. I think what you're speaking to is so important. You're probably articulating it much better than me and my ping pong brain. Because it's like your body in the heart rate racing like that. It was doing that for a reason. Like it's saying, I perceive something that's making me feel like I need to speed up. I need to keep up with something. Maybe that's a vigilance. Maybe that's I'm preparing for something. There's some kind of perceived threat going on. And I think that our instinct is, and it's not always wrong either, is to stop it or to say, no, be quiet. And that can be helpful in some cases. But it also can actually be part of the pathology of what we do. Like we're trying, like, no, I don't like that. Stop it. When the body's saying, I have something to say, I need to follow this to completion. So it resolves instead of gets cut short. It's like the burnout wheel, the burnout cycle. Like there was a trigger for that. And it was like, I need to do something to protect us. And if you don't let me finish, I'm going to get stuck and I'm going to come back. And it's like, there's such value in being like, what is my body? Okay, body. Like, okay, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to go with you. So that you can feel like, thank you. I needed to do that. I needed to be allowed because I've mobilized and now, okay, no threat is coming. Okay. I can settle back down now because my defenses were met. My purpose was met. That's sometimes the only way we find that resolution. And to me, that is this larger concept of what comes up when we are recovering, when we are taking away that thing that pushed everything back down and cut it. It's like, that's what the food and the restriction, that's what it does. It's like, go back down, stop that, stop, slow down, heart, And it's kind of like, okay, well, we're taking that away. And now our heart's it's going to be faster. It's going to just feel very overwhelming. Oh my gosh, how do we do this? And then in the letting it do that and holding your hand as you do that, with whether that's with your habits and with your safety sense, with, that there's this kind of like, all right. Okay, we can do this. Yeah, there's this resolution on the other side. But feeling safe enough to say, I'm gonna watch my heart do that. I'm gonna let my heart go and I'm gonna follow it where it needs to go. That's the part. It's like, you got to have enough trust or safety or intuition or whatever it is to say, I trust that and I'll follow that. And sometimes our traumas are such that we don't have that trust.
Yeah,
it's never been proven to us that we can.
Yeah, and I also feel like I want to qualify this to anybody listening. I've never had a panic attack. Right? So I think if I had a panic attack, that anticipation of the brain kind of going like, oh my, like, where is this going? The first time this ever happened, I think it was 2013. I was sitting on my sofa and for a reason completely out of the blue, my chest clenches, my heart races, and this heat comes out. I don't think I've ever had it as strongly as I did on this one occasion. I'm still baffled by this myself. I don't even know if this is a useful thing to share. My mind went, is this how I die?
Oh.
Let's see. It was completely calm about it. It was just like, is this because I didn't know if it was a heart attack. I didn't, and the moment I didn't think panic attack. I didn't think anxiety or anything like that. My heart was racing and it was doing this. And I was like, maybe this is how I die. And I just sat and waited to see. And then it just,
Did you?
I didn't die, no. And I don't,
Yeah.
this is going to sound, I don't know if this is appropriate for the podcast. I don't feel scared of death or dying.
So you're saying, like, you start having a panic attack, you stop panicking about it. I think what most people will do in a panic attack is to panic about the panic attack, and that perpetuates the panic attack.
Yeah.
Probably people who are having panic attacks are more prone to panicking. Maybe not. I don't know. That's a ridiculous statement. I don't know that answer, but like, you just don't have that predisposition to panic. So you work your way right out of that. Well, how do you do that, Sarah? How do you not panic about something that seems threatening?
I have
you're not
no
afraid.
idea. Because, well, the worst case scenario, I'm okay with. I've made my peace with the worst case scenario. And that's
Well,
what I
if you
do before
haven't?
anything scary. Well, I don't know. Make peace with it. I don't know. We're all going to die. We can either resist that.
Well,
I don't have control over when that will be. And for the most part.
When I had my chronic Lyme come up, which I didn't know was chronic Lyme for a year and a half. So for a year and a half, I thought I was dying. And for 9 months of that, I really did think I was dying. Like, I was having panic attacks every day. This was before I recovered, right? So I was going to every specialist known to man. And I was seeing this acupuncturist, and she brought up the concept of, it was the first time I'd heard of it, of radical acceptance. And basically, I was like, I'm going to die. I was like afraid I was going to die all the time. And she was like, kind of like, I think she was just like, you got to accept that you're gonna, like, one day, and that you might now. You know what I mean? Like, she was basically trying to get me to that place of acceptance. And I don't think I saw her again. I think that was the point where we broke up, because I was like, don't even suggest to me that my worst fear is okay. I was not ready to hear that. And that, now I'm thinking back, that probably was representing a lot of stuff that was coming up at that time. I don't think it was really about a fear of dying. It was a fear of something else. But anyway, I found myself saying to my dad recently, because he goes into these, like, oh gosh, he goes into these very places where he's like, well, I'm going to die. Nobody will remember me, and I'm afraid to die. You know? And I feel bad for making fun of him like that, but he does this. And I said to him, Dad, sometimes you just have to have radical acceptance, like, you're going to, and I was like, look at me 5 years later, just, but it took me a long time. And I think that there is sometimes this idea of our worst fear that does feel like life and death, that you could run so fast and furiously from. Over time, the more you're with that, you're like, no, I can't. No. And then you're like, well, what'd you say? Oh yeah. No, I can't. Okay. And the more you confront it, the more you're like, I'm going to ease in here. There is some kind of safety that comes from exploring something slowly and on your own terms. Not because somebody told you to, or you think that you should, or you have to heal, but just because it's like, what is my worst fear? What is this thing I'm so terrified of? I'm not ready to do any more than name it. And then I name it, and then I run far, far away. And then I come back. And then what is it? And it's just a slow exploration. It has to be on your own terms. And that takes time. And I think that is essentially how a safety develops with something, including our worst fears, including the thing that we've been using our eating disorders to push away. It's slow, and it is patient, but it's kind of like it starts with just a willingness to look at it. Or not a willingness, because my acupuncturist did not ask permission. She just came in and told me I was going to die, and I need to make peace with that. And I was like, go away.
I feel like the conversation's taken quite an interesting turn.
It always does.
What was this episode about again?
How do you deal with
dying if you don't have
deal with death
disorder to buffer it?
How do you accept death? It's how do you, yeah. I still think it's like you can replace death with the fear of what you are trying not to feel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's essentially emotions we're talking about: fear, overwhelm.
Yeah. And the idea being that things will be harder without the eating disorder, right? That's the fear. All these things are going to come up that I'm going to have to deal with without that. And I can say, personally, I'm going to imagine you're going to say something similar, that I never felt worse. Life was never harder than when I was struggling.
I agree. Yes. the initial push, right? The first time this comes up and you don't have your eating disorder to push it down. And I'll see this with clients too. There's some time that is hard and it's scary. I think a depression can descend, if not an anxiety that makes us just be like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? And then, but after that, like that's the rise. And then something clears after that, typically. Then yes, it's like, oh, you've crossed a hump, and it actually isn't.
Yeah. Well, I think with food, there was a lot of running away from how I felt, right? And we can run away from how we feel, but it's gonna follow us. It's gonna catch up. Someone shared a lovely example that a therapist had said to them. They were like, you can push your feelings into the other room if you want, but they're just in there lifting weights. They're gonna come out bigger and stronger and
That's
overpower
right.
you. So when we're talking about control, for me, how I take control, I see acceptance as taking control.
Yes, it's ironic.
It's the ultimate, right? Because
Mhm.
I am can't choose whether this feeling's here or not. But the last of man's freedoms, as Viktor Frankl says, is to be able to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance. Blah, blah, blah.
You could say that outright. You don't have to. Yeah, it's good.
True. It's true.
You're sarcastic. You're blah blah blah.
It was. I guess that's me not wanting to tip over into sentimentality, which you and I.
That's what I'm saying. Give yourself permission. You say it.
Yeah, no, that's for my British people. I need to remove the sentimentality, and it's still the message is still there by acknowledging that there is a certain sentimentality around this, and there's a truth in it as well, and that both exist.
Yeah.
So when I'm sitting there and this feeling like of panic or whatever it is that's going on in my body, for me to go, come on then, like for me, that's the ultimate control. I can't control that the feeling's here, but I can go, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to kill me?
Yeah.
Kill me. Come on then. If you think you're on.
It's like going to it's like having a cavity, right? And not wanting to go to the dentist because it's going to hurt when they pull it out. Of course, it probably doesn't anymore because they just Novocaine it. But I'm just saying metaphorically, if we're going to use something, it's like you can keep avoiding it, but your tooth's going to keep hurting. So you can keep not going, and you can keep, taking ibuprofen or whatever the stuff is you put on your tooth. But essentially, when you get to the dentist and they pull it out, it does hurt, but then it doesn't bother you anymore. I mean, that's a very clean way of putting it. But it's like, well, the cavity is then addressed. It's not going to keep chasing you. You're not going to keep developing, and you may have a recovery time. But there's something about uprooting something.
Yeah. If someone says to me, I've got this eating disorder and it protects me from my depression, and I don't feel my depression because of this eating disorder, I might be like, and I'm saying this tongue in cheek, keep the eating disorder then, right? But nobody's saying that. They're saying I have this eating disorder, and yes, it's a distraction from the depression at times, but I'm still really depressed and I'm still anxious and I'm still feeling all these things. It's not protecting you. And I think the belief that it is, it's trying to perform a function. Let's acknowledge that. But if we're saying that it actually works, then there isn't a motivation or a need even to address it or to try and do something different.
Right. Like it works to a degree and then it doesn't, it's not solving anything. Because you can choose. You can be like, that's good enough for me. I would rather keep the eating disorder to keep certain other things at bay. And I would rather keep keeping them at bay. Like that's work and that's hard and that's not pleasant. But I'd rather do that than get my tooth pulled. Because for some people, getting that tooth pulled is going to have a huge repercussions and recovery period. I think especially in the case of like trauma, right? There's going to be, I don't want to minimize the experience of that for some. There is a reason that is being kept at bay. And for some people, that's a huge, huge reason. And I respect that.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask the listener like a provocative question and just inviting everyone just to reflect on the question for themselves. But what if you just didn't try to fix your disordered eating? What if you didn't? What if you just said, okay, like this is it, this is here, and I'm going to live with it. And just notice your response. This is not me saying do this. It's not me saying don't do this. It's just noticing what the response is to that.
Yeah.
Like, what is the part that says okay, or the part that says no?
Mm-hmm. Bye, everyone. See you next time.
See you. Bye.
So
Red nose. Love it.